So I'm here to talk about college and mental health, which has been of some interest to me really as long as I've been a consultant in independent schools, which is 35 years. And I remember being at a school in Cambridge, Massachusetts, with a girl that we felt was becoming anorexic in the fall of her senior year. She had always been a kind of a super driven perfectionist girl. We knew she was certainly at risk for her perfectionism and her drivenness, but then she was becoming clearly much thinner and more drawn, and her friends were starting to register that she was losing a lot of weight, and they were reporting it to the counselor and the nurse and other people, and I was brought in. And we sat down with her parents, who happened to be professors at a local university, Cambridge, and we tried to persuade them that it would be a good thing if she eased up and didn't apply to college early decision. She wanted Princeton early decision. And we advanced this notion to the parents and the girl, and she said, if I can't apply to Princeton early, I'm gonna die. And I thought, whoa, right? I mean, for her, that was an instantaneous reaction. Everything was about Princeton. And with some more conversation with her parents, I realized that her parents were also hoping that when she got into Princeton, which they expected she would do, and her record suggested that she would, that then her mental health problems would resolve. Well, I was thinking, does this girl need to be in an anorexia unit in a hospital? Right, not will it all be fine when she gets into Princeton. I mean, does she need to be hospitalized now because of her weight loss? And I realized that the parents were fixated on this as the holy grail for this girl and her life and her mental health. But anything that got in the way of that suggested they were frightened and brittle about it. Had to be college, and had to be this extremely hard to get into college. Not something would you want to bet your life and your mental health on getting into Princeton? I don't think so, right? And these were intelligent people and thoughtful people, but they'd gotten themselves into a real corner, a very, very painful corner. And when I saw more families that were wildly anxious about the college process, I was moved to write an article. And it was one of the first I wrote for Independent School magazine. I went back and checked because Barbara had used the title of that original article, College Admissions, a Failed Rite of Passage. And I wrote the article in 1989. And I've been dining out on it for 30 years because these issues of college admissions and mental health and how they react to one another have never gone away. And as long as I've been at an independent school, there have been families who have become so gripped by this process. And the process has seemed to degrade the family's mental health. Do you know what I'm talking about? No, yes, you do, right? So we're not talking about all families. We're not talking about all families. But we are talking about some families where this process begins to unravel them. And I will see a family later this week at Belmont Hill. And it's quite clear that they are in extraordinary anxiety at this moment. And it has to do with their junior son and their feeling that he hasn't got his act completely together in high school. And their job as parents, clearly I can tell from their emails, is to have gotten him completely ready. You know, but completely ready. I don't know what their college ambitions are. It's a question I'm going to ask when I meet with them later this week, but I can tell from the emails that their idea of what parenting is to have produced the finished product that then can apply out. So I'm not in any doubt that college is in their minds in a big way, and from my point of view, not a good way. So when I wrote back in '89, I wrote that college admissions was a failed rite of passage. It happened to be a time when I was reading a lot about rites of passage, and the transition from childhood to adulthood, which in traditional societies, we no longer call them primitive societies because sometimes they had extraordinary wisdom that we seem to have forgotten. But in many traditional societies, there is a ceremony that takes children from childhood to adulthood. And our more complex and modern society doesn't have anything like that. And to the extent that there is any rite of passage for middle class and upper middle class children, it is the process of graduating from high school and going off to college. And what I was saying is, when you look at the criteria for what a true rite of passage does, and you compare it to the college admissions process, the true rite of passage is supposed to be a celebration of what's been accomplished in childhood and a moving through with guides of departing one's childhood and then going through a ceremony which inducts one into adulthood. And it's very clear what the phases are of a true rite of passage. And the idea of it is you're supposed to take a cohort of young people from this point and take them into adulthood in a celebratory way, sometimes with a test, sometimes with a terrible physical test, a painful physical test, a scarification, something like that. But they all get through. The process is overseen by people in the village, in the community, in the tribe, who are not the parents. It is crucial that this moving on phase be done away from the parents and by essentially experienced, objective folks, good at taking young people on this journey, right? And everybody in the community recognizes that the young people are best in the hands of these people better than parents, particularly if there's some ordeal or trial, right? You see the rough analogy? You're getting why I said the college admissions process? And you hear and you're understanding why I keep emphasizing that the rite of passage doesn't work that well when your parents are in it. It doesn't work that well if you don't get the whole cohort through. But what is absolutely true about rituals in traditional societies is that they are supposed to bind the anxiety of the participants. And even if there's a fearsome test, the ritual itself and the guarantee that all children will get through it in a good way and arrive on the side of adulthood, that guarantee should bind the anxiety of the parents who are turning their children over to the process and for the children themselves. And of course, the college admission process does exactly the opposite. It drives up the anxiety, it divides the community, and it makes parents crazy, right? So I wrote about this in this 1989 paper, and I believed that I would eventually go on and give talks to senior parents and calm their anxieties by telling them this is that their child was making this transition from childhood to adulthood. In fact, what I started doing to parents is saying, because independent school parents are very competitive and they always want to be on top of things. Is that true? Right. So I told them, if you think this is about college, you're missing the boat. It's really about something else. What it is about is the end of your child's childhood and the end of your day-to-day parenting and finding a way to let go of your child. And that is the fundamental, foundational, underlying drama of the college admissions process. And if you think it's about getting into X, Y, or Z, you're missing this deeper drama. That was my challenge in the article. Okay, so I found there were some people there were some college counselors who contacted me. And maybe you don't know the name Ann Ferguson, or maybe you do, but I'm of an age now where I'm aging out and all my cohort of people are aging out. Ann was, for 14 years, the college admissions counselor at Hathaway Brown in Cleveland, and then went and was associate director of college counseling at Phillips Andover for the last 6 or 7 years of her career. And she had me up to Andover Parents Weekend many times. I've been to Andover Parents Weekend, I've been to Exeter Parents Weekend. If you want, if you're at a school that has a crazy-making college parents weekend for juniors, I'm your guy, because I will try and calm them, and I think the effects last 10, 15 minutes. I was once at Exeter there was a huge snowstorm, and I felt obliged to get there, and I did get there, and many parents it was crazy to be out driving to Exeter. There were people who'd arrived, and especially people from abroad, who'd gotten to the town several days earlier. They'd made it a longer visit with their children. But the people who got there, you just knew that we all had to be crazy to be there in the middle of a snowstorm, but they were as on edge and determined not to miss any little thing about college admissions for their juniors. What happened to me, though, is in a speaking way, is that schools wanted me to go to the source and to talk directly to kids. Well, talking to kids, that struck me as odd. They said, would you talk about college admissions to kids? And I thought, I'm trying to give adults perspective here so they can give kids perspective. How do I talk to kids and give them perspective directly to the children? And I played around with my themes, and I played around with some ways. I like speaking. I really like speaking to kids. And it's a treat for me, and I was determined to find a way to do it if I could. And so over the years, I find them speaking to more and more senior classes, but also they say the seniors and the juniors, and maybe the seniors and juniors and 10th graders, and how about 9th grade? How about the whole bunch of them? How about 9 through 12? Dr. Thompson, will you speak to them? I say, sure. And I want to tell you what I do, because I'm trying to take the wisdom that I wish I could give the parents and give it directly to the kids. I'm not talking about anything that you aren't doing in your offices all the time. You're trying to give perspective and wisdom to parents, are you not? And then you're trying to give perspective and wisdom to kids who may be on the young side for the wisdom, but they want it, and who may have no perspective, particularly because their parents have no perspective. And so I'm often thinking of myself, how do I give insights to kids who didn't ask for it? They're told to go sit in an assembly room and listen to some guy talk about college admissions, and how can I give them perspective and wisdom? So in the past 2 months, I've done this for 3 high schools. I did it in late March for Concordia International School in Shanghai, China. they had asked me to come and consult for a week because of the extraordinary pressure that the kids in Shanghai are under. Then I did it for the junior class at Washington International School in DC. And then I went and did it for the boys in the senior class, spring of their senior year, at Boys Latin in Maryland in Baltimore. So I've done this assembly with 3 audiences where I can remember still the looks of the kids' faces and the way they reacted. And this is what I asked them. I say, and I don't know if you can do this because I think it sort of impeaches you from your job, but I say to the students, look, I'm going to base this whole assembly on questions. And my first question is, how many of you have a college in mind by name? Well, obviously, for the seniors at Boys Latin, they're already in. So that didn't work for them. But for the juniors at Washington International School, that was certainly a very relevant question. And by juniors, in the spring of the junior year, you've got about 60% of the hands. I say, all right. Nothing I can do about those of you who still haven't picked your college, except bless you. Maybe that's a very good thing. But let me ask the 60% who've already picked a college. I want you to imagine for a second that you are rejected at your first choice college. You're rejected at your first choice college. I once asked that of a senior class in the fall of their senior year at Dalton School, and the girl began to cry and said, I can't even hear this. But she started to cry. Can't even hear this. And I said, okay, and while I'm at it, you're also rejected at your second choice college. Okay? I was once in West LA and at the Windward School, and the boy went, damn! Somehow he absorbed the first hit, but he couldn't, the second choice gone. And I said, now sit with it for a second. Your first choice is gone, and your second choice is gone. I said, what is the long-term impact on your life? And almost always, a girl says, well, I'd be really upset. I said, of course. If you've applied to school, it was your first choice school, I get it. How long would your upset last? I don't know. Well, think about that. How long would your upset last? And sometimes you get a kid who says, 2 or 3 weeks. I say, fine. And then other times I get a kid who says, no, it could longer. I said, well, would it last into college? Yes. It would probably last up until you got a job after college. And if you didn't get a good enough job, then that would be essentially a retroactive proof that the not getting into your first choice college would have hurt you, and that's when you'd know. I mean, my most distressing conversations, I've, for 20 years, went to Asian international schools almost every year, and the pressure there is, anybody worked in an Asian international school? Where'd you work?
In Asia?
Yeah.
And I worked in China, in Shenzhen.
In Shenzhen?
Yeah.
Yeah, so you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, Manhattan's nothing.
It's Manhattan's nothing. I love that. Manhattan is nothing. Yeah.
A little scandal, please.
At any rate, I asked a question once in front of the whole upper school at Western Academy in Beijing. I said, what's the long-term impact on you if you don't get into your first choice college? And a boy stood up and said, it would be a lifelong psychological injury from which you would never recover. And he was absolutely sincere. And then later, a girl in that class said to me, she said, I'm applying to Seoul National, and you can't even apply unless your SATs are what, $12.50 or something like that. And she said, you can't even apply. And she said, you know, when kids don't get into Seoul National, sometimes they commit suicide. Well, of course, that gets the psychologist's attention. And I was looking for perspective for her. I said, tell me, where did your parents go to college? And she said, they both went to Seoul National. And this may be, I mean, it may be in many ways the most selective college in the world because of just the Korean system. She said, if I don't get into Seoul National, I'll never get the job that I want, and I'll never be able to marry at the level I want. Okay, a devastation for my life. Luckily, I've got other kids who say something different. And usually there's a slacker boy, and you can always tell a slacker boy because when he raises his hand to answer a question, everybody goes, whoa, 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 right? So you know, okay, I got the class slacker. He says, no problem at all, no problem. And he has no credibility because he's not done work in several years, and he's not in the same race as everybody is. But everybody's amused to hear his point of view, which is it's no big deal, right? What I want is something more thoughtful, and sometimes I get a student voice. Says I was at the Seven Hills School in Cincinnati once, and a girl said, I'm applying to 6 colleges, and they're all on my top 10 list. I thought, that's good. That is good, right? That is psychological security, right? Unless her 6 choices are completely daft, but I'm imagining that a college counselor had her hand in there and helped shape those choices. So she said 6, and they're all on my top 10 list. Good to go, right? My all-time favorite was a girl at the Brearley School. This was in December of her senior year. I said, if you don't get into your first or second choice college, what's the long-term impact on your life? And she said, nothing at all. I said, you sound very confident. She said, I am. I said, tell me why there's no impact. She said, we're all going to be dead someday. And I thought, well, that is the long view, right? We're all going to be dead someday. And I thought it was so funny. I told it that night to the Brearley senior parents, and no one laughed. Not one parent laughed. And you could tell, I hope that's not my daughter. You know, right? I mean, no lift, no sense of humor. And the girl had meant it very humorously, but she actually sent me to the New York Times for the next 2 weeks, and I read, because I'd never thought about whether your college is mentioned when you're dead. Have you ever read the obituaries in the New York Times and thought about, do they mention your college when you're dead? Well, you'll be happy to know the New York Times does mention your college when you're dead. I'd never thought about that. But what's very interesting, of course, is that the colleges that many of the people whose lives have gotten to the point where they get an obituary in the New York Times do not go to the colleges that the families on the Upper East Side of Manhattan want for their children. In fact, I remember one time reading about a fellow who'd been, it seemed he'd been racing yachts for most of his life, and he'd won a lot of awards racing yachts, and he'd gone to Yale. I could not tell whether there'd been any work involved, yacht racing. I don't know I didn't know how he earned the yachts. I had the feeling they were sort of came with the territory, or his territory. And right next to it was the obituary of a professor of biology who had written the best-selling biology text in the history of college biology texts, and it sold tens of millions of copies. Now, as an author, I really orient with envy to any other author who's sold tens of millions of books. I want to know about that. And I read on down, and of course, he'd gone to Long Beach State. So I had on the same page on this day, these two people had passed away, and their college is mentioned in the New York Times. But you can tell I'm always searching. I'm always searching for perspective. I once was at the Windward School talking to the seniors in Los Angeles. And I had them talking about if you don't get in, somebody said, well, you can always go to Long Beach State. And the college counselor said, that's where I went. Right? One of those moments where the kids think, uh-oh, our college counselor couldn't get in anywhere good, right? Or we better not tell our parents that, because they'll think, right? Isn't this the way it goes? Right? Because you're getting these kids into the. But I listen to a lot of kids talk to each other about how they're going to deal with rejection. As I say, this is a tricky thing for a college counselor to do, much easier for an outsider, because I can come in and stir the pot and then go. If you're asking kids how you're going to take a rejection, a parent might think, well, you're not doing, what do you mean? What's that about, right? You're not helping my child get into college. And certainly that's the way enough of them would understand that conversation. It's very hard for you. But because I come in from the outside and I'm a psychologist, I can mess about this way. I think it's very helpful to kids to talk about how they anticipate their own ability to deal with rejection, because they then tell a story of their own resilience. A boy says to me, well, I'd go to the college I got into, and I'd work really hard. And at the end of 2 years, if I liked it, I'd stay, and if I wanted to transfer, I'd have a record I could transfer with. Oh, well, that's good. Did everybody hear that? Right? Life isn't over, right? And I started going to independent schools in Texas, and in the early days, almost the whole class go to UT Austin, but after George W. Bush was governor, and the particular form of affirmative action, which they said a certain percentage of every school's class will go, then all of a sudden the independent schools weren't able to guarantee or get their kids into Austin. They had to go to other UTs, which many parents, the Hockaday School for Girls in Dallas, think is the end of life itself. And, going to UT Waco, I mean, it's like death. It's like death, only it's not. And it turns out the kids do, in fact, go to UT Waco for 2 years, and then they transfer to Austin. That does happen. But for a particular kind of kid and parent, that can seem frightening. And I want them as a group to consider it, because then you're not saying it to any one kid, so she doesn't feel, or he doesn't feel singled out, or, blackballed in some way. And you talk about the kids can give testimony of their own resilience. Now, when I was at Concordia, there was a French boy who wants to go to a French film school, and he looked a mess. He looked a wreck. I had earlier asked the kids at Concordia how much sleep they got, and I'd had a range from 3.5 to 8 hours. It's typical in an international school. It's typical in a U.S. independent school in seniors and juniors. The lower sleep amounts always being, of course, in the older grades. But this boy said he was absolutely gripped by the fear that he wouldn't get into this French film school. And I asked how much sleep he'd gotten the night before, and he said 1.5 hours. And I said, are you worried all the time? And he said, yes, worried all the time. And I said, in what grade are you? And he said, 9th grade. And I got to say to him in front of this whole audience, I mean, I was as surprised as anybody at my age. I can't always sort out a 9th grader from a 10th grader, a young-looking 11th grader. I knew he was on the younger side, but 9th grader, I said, can you keep this up for 4 years? And he said, no, I don't think so. So I can give stress talks. I can go in and teach mindfulness. I can actually. But if I want to have kids develop perspective about the stress levels on them, it's hugely helpful if I can get the most stressed kids in the class to speak up and talk about the amount of stress they're experiencing. And it's not that hard to do. All I have to do is ask 8th graders, how many of you have a college in mind in an international school? I know what I'm going to get. I'm going to get 3 Stanfords, 2 Oxfords, and a Cambridge in the 8th grade. And I ask an 8th grade girl, do you think about Oxford every day? She says, every day. Right? And I want the other kids to be sitting there thinking, should I be doing that? Should I be doing that? Now, the problem for you is that you probably know the kids. The advantage I have being an outsider is I have no idea what I'm walking into. I don't know the family story. I don't know the background. I can be dumb because I am dumb. And I can just ask, did your parents go to Oxford? Does that weigh on you? I remember a boy at Belmont Hill. He was fighting like a hero to be in the top third of his class. But he was incredibly disappointed in his performance. And his parents were very worried in a way that suggested that they would like it fixed. And I got the boy in my office and I said, tell me where your parents went to college. And he said, well, my mother went to Yale and then Cambridge, and my father went to Harvard and then Oxford. And I thought, you poor bastard. Right? I mean, the weight of those 4 degrees. And actually, we got him a student year abroad in Spain, and that really helped him a lot. He needed to be away from them and his inevitable comparisons. He was not going to go to those places. Please, Barbara.
Is it too early for questions?
It's not if they come from you. Go right ahead.
Well, I was just wondering, when you talk about these circumstances where you ask kids, the most stressed out kids,
Yep.
and you get their answers,
Yep.
Does it ever happen that the other students look at that and go, oh, I should be worried like that too? That it somehow holds it up as in some way admirable as opposed to the opposite?
It's actually a good question, because when I was in graduate school and working in a hospital in my training as a clinical psychologist, it was a problem doing group therapy with anorexics, because all the anorexics admired the most restrictive, thinnest anorexic. And it's a real danger that they'll admire a pathology. That has not been my experience in the assemblies, because if I can get 5 or 6 or 7 kids to talk, then you see that there's a range of reactions to this process. And that the people seem to have psychological defenses against it, or they don't. And the ones who don't, I think there are very few people who think I need to be like that, because they're so up against it. I mean, the kid who bursts out in tears and says, I can't even hear that question. Right? I can't even hear that question. My Buddhist friend George used to say that a person like that has no room between their brain and their skull. He had an image of the brain being absolutely jammed up against the skull. There is a little space in there, isn't there? right? You're not supposed to be right up against it, but when kids speak and they're right up against it, and sometimes almost hyperventilate when they start to talk about their first choice college, or that their voice sounds strained, other kids are thinking, I don't think that's healthy. I think that's the main reaction. And there's some appreciation. They do, when I ask them sleep, and I occasionally talk to 10, 12 kids and ask how many sleep. If somebody says she got 9 hours of sleep, there's often applause for the biggest sleeper, because they know that's healthy. So no, I haven't seen that this works in that direction. I don't think I would have kept it up if I thought there was a risk of that. So it's a simple question. And I don't know, you have to ask yourselves and you have to talk with me when we get to our Q&A about whether or not this can be adapted for the college counseling office. For me, asking questions like this, how are you going to react emotionally in the future if this thing that you are hoping for doesn't come through, that question is just absolutely reflexive to a psychologist. How are you going to take that? How's that going to be for you, right? Is that a question you can ask? It's a question I would like you to ask. And I find it has more power when I ask it of a group. I've never heard that question is then part of the junior class discussion, but it sure is when I'm in front of the junior class. It sure isn't when I'm in front of the 9th graders and the 10th graders, because I asked the 9th graders, how many of you have talked to your parents in the past 2 weeks of how important it is to go to a good college? Concordia International School, 95% of the 9th grader hands went up, and then I say to a girl, how many times in the last 2 weeks have you had that conversation? She says about 3 or 4 times a week. And I say, well, and is it your mom or your dad? My dad, always. And I said, is there any new information in the conversation? Does it motivate you? No, it's boring, and it makes me worried. It's hard on the relationship. Well, I want the kids to hear that from one another, because a child who has a father who is overbearing on this issue may feel that she's uniquely cursed and alone. And I know she isn't. I absolutely know she isn't. Anyway, asking kids psychological questions about college admissions. Then in my assembly I say, I sometimes tell a story about a Belmont Hill boy. We do a 30-hour team building with our senior class, Belmont Hill. We're a big athletic powerhouse, so it is hard to get the boys away from their coaches at the beginning of the school year, but we get them for 30 hours. We take them up to Camp Cody in Freedom, New Hampshire, and we do a bunch of exercises and outdoor things, and but the indoor exercise is mainly designed by my counselor, June Schmunk, and by me as a school psychologist. And we ask them to do a lifeline. We give long rectangular white piece of paper and then all kinds of markers, and June goes out and gets feathers and stickies and all sort of kid stuff. She has 3 girls at home, so she does that to appall the boys. But they have really fun doing a lifeline. We ask them to do a lifeline that has the 5 most important events in their life. These are all 17-year-olds, a few 18-year-olds. And we're asking them, and they say almost always the move to a new town, big, changing school to Belmont Hill, the death of a grandparent. Anybody, of course, who's lost a parent, that appears there. And but death of a grandparent is statistically more common. It's on a lot of them. Death of a pet, it's on a lot of them. And then some big breakthrough. boy one year said, I've sold 2 apps to Apple, right? They're for sale in the App Store. Everybody goes, whoa, right? That's big. That's big. Some kind of achievement, or a boy in music saying he played at a certain, a lot of our boys say an athletic win, a team win, a championship of some kind. So the teachers do them also. So I'm 72 years old, it's a lot longer lifeline. In fact, I have to go around the paper like this, and then I mark the 5 biggest events in my life, right? My marriage to Teresa. Oh, whoops, my second marriage. So I have a divorce, right? Right? And then the birth of my children, and the death of my parents, and the birth of my grandchildren, right? And one 17-year-old boy looked at my lifeline and said, Dr. Thompson, you didn't put down college. And I said, no, I didn't. And he said, well, where did you go to college? And I said, Harvard College. And he said, and you didn't put that down? And I said, no. I guess actually from this perspective, it doesn't rank that high. And he said, but we're taught to think it's like the most important thing in life. And I said, yeah, I remember that. I remember that. But from my perspective, looking back, it actually isn't that big. And I was with another teacher, that of our music department, Donnell Patterson. And they said, Mr. Patterson, where did you go to college? And he said, New England Conservatory. And they said, you didn't put that down on yours. Well, Donnell's had a complicated life, and he had a divorce and a first marriage. You know, there's some things you got to get down there if you happen to have lived a life, right? And they said, but Donnell, isn't that an audition school? Isn't that a really hard place? Yeah, Mr. Patterson, they would call him. Mr. Patterson, isn't that a very tough place you get into? And he said, yes, yes. And they said, well, but you didn't even put New England Conservatory down. He said, actually, my big musical breakthrough came about 3 years earlier, when I was asked to join a band with men, and I was playing with men who were 15. I was 15, and they were all adult men. They thought I was good enough to play with their band. For me, that was a much bigger deal than getting into college, right? Something that happens in real life. And the boys sit there and they look at us like, whoa, that's not what we're hearing, right? And you tell us that it's the perspective different. Well, of course it is. But how do you put an old head on young shoulders, as my neighbor said when she was complaining about her 2 children, and she couldn't get them to make good decisions. She said, you can't put an old head on new shoulders. And I remembered my mother saying that. But that's what we're trying to do. So what do I do when I get an assembly full of kids? What I say to them is this: I want you to think about the whole of the human life cycle, from birth, which we've all had, to death, which we will all have. I'm going to give you birth to death, right? And I did this at Washington International. I just did it with the boys at Boys Latin in Maryland. I said, give me the 5 universal turning points in life. Give me the 5 universal turning points in life that. And I challenge them, I say, it's hard actually to find 5 universal turning points in life. And usually somebody says, marriage. I say, okay. Not everybody gets married. Actually, fewer people used to get married. But almost everybody at some time in life makes a commitment to another person, a romantic commitment, falls in love. The neuroscientists tell us that's the second biggest changer of our mental maps, is making a commitment to somebody else and sharing your life with them. I said, what's the first? And they said, having children. They always get that. I said, yes, you have children, it makes you crazy. And you're crazy forever after that. And so we got marriage and having children. Other universal turning point, puberty. It's okay, yep, that's a biggie. Puberty changes you forever. And I've worked with kids who, for one reason or another, had an endocrine system that wasn't setting them out on puberty, and it's a tragedy for them until they can get some hormonal treatment and start it, because you don't want to be a child forever. So yes, puberty, universal. Now I've got puberty, marriage, children, first job. Very typical, boy, first job. I say, well, is that the first job after college? Is that the first job? Have you ever had a job in high school? Is that, do you mean self-supporting? And they usually come down on self-supporting. Self-supporting, okay, I say. So, is that the adult moment? And then a kid says, leaving your family, which of course is what I'm after. And they say, leaving your family. I say, so when is that moment? I'll say to seniors in the fall, senior year, and they say, well, next year. Next fall. I said, yeah, that's right. Leaving your family. That to me is what college admissions is actually about. It's about leaving your family. It's about the official end of your childhood. It is you embarking on your young adulthood without the constant supervision of your parents. And that is a big deal. Are you going to become a loving, productive, moral, independent young person? And who's in charge of that? And oh, by the way, can Pomona guarantee that? Can Davidson guarantee that? Can Stanford guarantee that? What does college have to do with you becoming a loving, moral, independent, productive young adult? Yeah, and I tell them I think that they're leaving their families is a huge, big deal, and one of the major turning points in life. That's the case I make. And then I point out to them that puberty, marriage, children, leaving home and first job, they've come up with 5 things that are mainly before the age of 35. Anything later in life, I say. And somebody says, retirement. And I say these days, yeah. In my early 70s, it's the only topic of conversation among all my friends. How long are you going to work? Have you got enough money saved? I mean, we're all talking about it. I say, yes, okay. So now we got retirement, and we got all those other things. Anything between 35 and 65 or 70. Now, this is really interesting, because high school seniors have no ability to think about middle-aged people. None whatsoever. They are profoundly disinterested, and they have no insight. So I always get a boy who says, a midlife crisis? And I say, I think that's an invention of the media. I don't think it's universal. Is there anything? And then finally, and it takes a long time, and I wait, somebody says, when your children leave home? And that's what I'm looking for, right? And that opens the door to me saying, your parents, you are going through a process that is a big life change. And your parents are going through a process that's a big life change. I ask them, how many of you are first children or only children? Hands go up. So I say, so you're breaking the ice. You're the first to leave the house. How many of you are middle kids? Very few hands. There's so many 2-kid families now. You just don't get a lot of middle kids anymore. And I said, you take your parents by surprise, because they think they know how to do this. They've done it with one. They still got one kid in reserve. And then the loss of you hits them and they can't. They're astonished by how hard the loss of you hits them. And then I said, how many of you are babies? And the hands go up. And I say, and you, of course, are putting your parents out of the parenting business. And it's been what your parents have been about for 18 years. Of all of the loves you get in life, and there are many possibilities for loves. Do you have a senior? Are you getting or are you saying the parents are going to start? You started to do this? Yes. When I talk to parents about this, I just start to talk about it. I get parents start to cry. But it's usually the parent of a senior. I just did this. I went to a mother-son breakfast at Belmont Hill and started talking about the loss of these boys. And somebody said, you made the moms cry. I said, it's like shooting fish in a barrel. It's just not that hard. I said, I tell kids, when you're a parent, and I'm a parent and grandparent, when you first see your baby, your heart just jumps out of your body and attaches to that child, and you are completely screwed. And your life is never the same, and the time goes by like that. Every parent's experience. You had a toddler, all of a sudden you have a 16-and-a-half-year-old in your face saying, I can't wait to leave home. And I asked 11th and 12th graders, how many of you said to your parents, I can't wait to get out of here? And you usually get about a quarter of the class raises their hand. And I say, sweet, that's nice. I said, how many of you have thought it? And then, of course, there's a forest of hands. They haven't said it, but they've thought it. And I said, so your parents are dealing with the loss of you and the end of their day-to-day parenting. And these are extraordinary challenges because this has been their work together. When my wife and I had young children at home, we were always saying, we got to get away from the kids, go out and have dinner. And we'd get a babysitter, we'd go out and have dinner, and we'd order from the menu, and then we'd start to talk about our kids. That was our evenings, right? How many parents have I got in here? Yeah. We have, yeah, there you are. And then all of a sudden they're gone. And you don't know if you've done all you should have done. You don't know if you're sending a half-baked child out in the world. I had a girl in New York who told me that her father, heck of a workaholic and very successful guy, but not much involved, offered her senior year to walk her to school in the mornings. And she smiled and said, Dad, that was second grade. Would have been nice, second grade. I had a senior girl at one school who told me that her father was starting sentences with, if you ever come home, if we ever see you. And she said, he's talking as if it's a death or a divorce, right? And one of my favorites was, I asked a girl, I said, are you seeing any weird behavior in your parents? And the girl said, yeah, I was coming down one morning to breakfast, and my mother said, why are you wearing no socks? And she said, Mom, they're just, the fall of senior year. Mom, they're just socks. No, why did you choose those socks? Mom, they're just socks. Every decision is important. And the girl said, I realized my mother had gone crazy. My mother had lost it. So I tell a few of those stories and I say, how many of you are seeing weird behavior in your parents? How many of you are getting gazing behaviors? The girl who told me she was the last of 3 children, and her parents were always taking her out to dinner. She'd be sitting in a restaurant, and she'd realize it was really super silent. And she'd look up from the menu, and both of her parents would be sitting there with the big, puppy eyes, gazing at her. And I asked people about gazing behaviors, and then kids. If one kid will throw his parents under the bus, then it just opens the floodgates for how straight. Now, some of the kids, unhappily, are fighting an enormous amount with their parents. Other kids are just getting weepy parents. One boy, this is years ago at BB&N, said to me, Dr. Thompson, in 11th grade, I had a 1 a.m. curfew, and now I'm a senior, and I've got an 11 p.m. curfew. And I said, did you, like, get in trouble? Is this a punishment? He said, no. And I said, well, do you want me to talk to your mom about it? And he said, no, look, she's a single mom, and I'm an only child. And I know she just wants more time with me. She just wants me at home more. When I tell that story, I begin to get testimony from seniors. I get testimony about fighting. I get testimony about clinging. I get testimony about reproaches. I get really hardworking, conscientious girls whose fathers are supervising and monitoring their work. And I said, does it feel unjust and unfair? Yes. I said, he's trying to jam in all of his parenting right at the end. It's a way of dealing with the loss, huh? So I'm free, again, to psychologically interpret what's going on. But I'm trying to give kids perspective. And I'm trying to talk about the psychological underpinnings of this departure from the family. When I do it with, there's some schools that ask me, would you talk to our seniors and their parents? And I do it, and it may have been Ann Ferguson who taught me this, but I use a sentence stem. As my daughter goes off to college, if I could tell her one thing, it would be ... Do you use this ever with parents and kids? And if I could tell my if I could tell my daughter one thing, it would be, if I could tell as I go off to college, if I could tell my parents one thing. So I, for years, have given that speech to the Belmont Hill School seniors in the spring of senior year. The college, they're all in. And in May, I meet with them in the chapel and their parents. And I do a very abbreviated talk about the challenges for the parents of letting go, the challenge for the kids of being independent and launching. I talk about the kids who are leaving younger brothers and sisters. I have the feeling that no one has asked them, when you go off to college, how's your 14-year-old brother going to take it? I did this with the boys at Boys Latin. I said, do you have younger brothers, younger sisters? Yes. Do they think you're a demigod? All the boys laughed and said, of course they do, right? It's a boys' school. They all think we're demigods. I said, are you helping younger siblings with homework? And I asked them to talk about that. I asked kids to talk about the pet they're leaving. I'll do almost anything to avoid talking about colleges, right? Because that's my gig. But the testimony I get from kids about leaving, I've had girls say, you know, I've kind of been the assistant mother for my younger sister, and I don't think my mother's doing that great a job, and I'm worried after I leave. And I tell about a Belmont Hill boy I had sent to me as a 10th grader, and a teacher said, he's a mess, he's a wreck, he's been just a disaster all fall. I think he's depressed. So I sat down with this kid and I ran a depression inventory on him, and he wasn't depressed. He was sleep deprived, and he looked terrible. I said, you're not getting any sleep. Why not? And he said, I don't know. And I said, have you ever had a sleep problem before? No. I said, has there been any change in your life? Have you lost a grandparent? Is your parents' marriage coming apart? Girlfriend dumped you? I ran through all of the no. I said, has anything changed in your life? He said, well, my older brother went to college. I said, oh. Did the two of you share a room? Yes, he said. I said, who was the person who said lights out? And the boy smiled. He said, that was my brother. And I said, well, you got to get your mother back online. She'd outsourced that parenting function to your older brother, and your older brother's in college, and you can't get yourself to bed, right? Of course. It was the older brother who got the younger brother to go to bed because he'd doing a parenting function. Talking to kids about the parenting they're doing of younger siblings, whether a sibling's going to miss them, or whether a sibling is being sort of pugilistic and saying, I'm going to take your room, I'm going to repaint it. My kids hate that. So, but I very often experience it when I'm in an assembly with kids, that I am talking to students and nobody's talked to them about the meaning of leaving their younger siblings. Are they going to let their younger sibling visit them in college? Will their parents allow that? And how important it is to a younger sibling to know that they're not going to be abandoned and that they're going to be remembered and that they'll get to see some of the college student's life. In 2 weeks, I'm at my 50th college reunion, and we're doing a celebration of my late college roommate's life. My late college roommate, sadly, was a brilliant genius who committed suicide and left a lot of extraordinary artwork. And his two brothers and I are putting on a celebration for him. But I've talked to his younger brother, who was his younger brother, Tim, who's now, Tim is now a 62-year-old man. But he's been talking to me about how meaningful it was that my late roommate, David, brought Tim to college, our room in college, and his 10-year-old memories of visiting our room and how important that was, how respected he felt that his older brother, David, would introduce him to his Harvard College roommates. Because I remember this little boy, who's now, a very successful man. But these aspects of college are, for me, as a psychologist and a therapist, by far the most important ones. And I talk to them about family being able to let go. And I talk to the parents about being able to let go. When I do the seniors, I went down a side road there. When I do the seniors, I talk to them for about 20 minutes or half an hour, and then we send them away, and they fill out their sentence stem. If I could tell my parents one thing, as I go off to college, if I could tell my parents one thing, it would be. And then the parents write, if I could tell my, says he goes off to college, if I could tell my son one thing, remember I'm at a boys' school as a psychologist, one thing it would be. And we all write these down in separate venues for 10 minutes. Everybody comes back, and I find a teacher, or June, the counselor, my counselor, she and I read them, and she reads the boys' voices, and I read the parents' voices. And we read them in alternating voices without identifying them. In fact, if we get one that's written with specific identifiers, we just change them in the moment so they become anonymous. And the cumulative power of all parents saying what they would like to say to their sons as they go off, and all sons saying, now, will you get a wild card boy who says something mean? I can't wait to, I've hated you, I hated Belmont Hill. Do we occasionally get them? Oh yeah. Do we occasionally get the knuckle-headed father who says, if I could tell my son one thing, it would be use latex condoms? And you think, oh, grow up, right? But the power of the students' voices and the power of the parents' voices anonymously it has a huge impact on an audience, huge impact. Everybody feels like, whoa, that's the whole of it. That's because in any one family there is fighting. In any one family there's this, but when all of the kids hear all of the parents, and when all of the parents hear all of the kids, it achieves what I'm after, which is an expression of our common humanity around this singular developmental challenge. And that's what I do. I am not doing this. This is not advertising. I am trying to offer you the things I've tried to refine in talking about the psychological aspects, because what I'm trying to do is offer kids and parents perspective. And I'm trying to put the college chase, a term I dislike, into a larger context, a more human context, where there are bigger things to care about than just college X, Y, and Z. So I'm done. Questions, thoughts, can you use this? Does it feel to you like this is stuff that a psychologist do, but as a college counselor, I can't really? Talk to me now, please. Yes, your name.
Dorothy.
Dorothy.
So I have, I guess, two questions. Hang on.
All right, we got to
use mic.
because we're
Okay,
live
sorry.
streaming. We got to have you on mic.
Okay, I think I have two questions. My first is, do you see any differences in the nature of this drama now that students go off with FaceTime and instant communication and text their parents several times a day from college? I mean, do you think the transition or the issues are a little different? That's my first question. And my second question may be part of the same, but I'm not sure. It seems to me, so I spent many years on the college side,
Right.
First in admissions and then working with freshmen and then as a dean. And now on the college counseling side, I see really intense parental involvement
Yes.
in both the day-to-day academic work and
Yes.
in the college preparation. Is that perception correct? I mean, do those kids have a harder time, or in what ways is this really extreme parental involvement affect the transition to the independence we hope they're going to have?
Right. They are two very different questions. I do not see that the social media has changed kids' departure from home all that much, in that they have to leave home. They have to go to college. They have to choose a place. They have to put themselves out there. They have to do everything, put everything they've ever done on a piece of paper and send it off to a bunch of strangers. A teacher, one school I worked at, said it's like walking out in public naked. It's a risky thing to do. And I don't think social media has made all that. I love these people who are going on YouTube and putting together a compilation of their rejections and acceptances, filming themselves. I think it's a way the kids have of trying to take control of a process where they feel sometimes quite helpless. And if they can use media to do it, that's fine. The issue of parental anxiety is, it's been the whole last 10 years of my career. One head of an independent school said to me, the biggest problem in our school is parental anxiety. It is changing everything. And I am seeing it not as a worldwide, I have to remind myself it's not a worldwide phenomenon. It is a worldwide upper middle class, English-speaking, ambitious parent phenomenon. But this cultivated child, who's the Canadian nonfiction writer? Blink and Malcolm Gladwell. Thank you. I forget his name because I'm so envious of how many books he's sold. Because he's a great writer, but he discussed the cultivated child. And you know, around the world, upper middle class parents who want American colleges are cultivating their children to fare thee well. And I've just been in China recently, and I'm always reminded of how extraordinarily strenuous that cultivation is in those countries where people just feel that they have to get their children to an American college, and they have to get them to an elite American college that other people in China will know the name of. And that's a really hard standard to meet for kids. And Concordia said, we want you to talk to our kids, because our college list at Concordia is 50. Well, that's insane, of course. It's just insane. But it's the only colleges that the parents will talk about. And so a kid feels ashamed and humiliated to not be a candidate for one of those 50 colleges. And that humiliation kids see from a long way off, and they feel they're a disappointment to their parents. And I'm not just talking about Chinese parents here. These schools have, of course, mainland Chinese and mixed passports, and Taiwanese and Korean parents, but there is an Asian parenting, but American middle-class parenting has become a lot more like this stylistically. This close supervision and this, the parents I'm going to see later this week said, our son doesn't seem to enjoy Belmont Hill. We've had tutors on him from the beginning, and he's just never turned out to be the effective student that we hoped he would be, but he's had 2 tutors every year, and he seems to like school less and less. Right? It's the parents writing. He has an A-, 2 B+s, a B, and a B-. He's not a disaster. He's a wonderful boy. But the parents are saying to me, all that we've done has not worked, and here it is on the eve of college applications, right? Tell us, Dr. Thompson, what more we can do. How can we get this boy in therapy? How can we get now? But it's like, oh, the tutors didn't work, we'll bring on the psychologist, right? Right? We've already had the neuropsych testing, you can count on that. And that was, but he didn't show a major learning disability. This is a middle-of-the-class kid, right? But the pressure on parents who cannot bear the idea of a child in the middle of the class it's really painful. And one of the things when I give my pressured child speech to parents is I remind them that at my school, we've had a problem for as long as I've been there, now 25 years at Belmont Hill. Every year, 50% of our boys are in the bottom half of the class. Everybody laughs. And I say, and I think it's true of every school I go to, right? And if you're rending your garments and wailing because your son's getting a first-rate education, he's in the bottom half of the class, then how does he feel about his education? And the parental anxiety, the parental expectations are super high, and we are unwittingly stoking those fires. And I'm always telling teachers, if a child in middle school does not do his homework, don't call his parents, right? Deal with it. Deal with it. Don't call the parent. Because after the parent gets 8 calls, they think, oh, the school needs us to get our son to do his homework, right? Well, yeah. And then the teacher is saying, these parents are nuts about homework. They're doing homework for their kids. And I say, you're calling them. Tell them to get there, make sure their child's homework is done. This gets to be, that's a sidebar. Did I answer your questions? There's so much I could be cranky about. I'll try and be, if you rephrase it, I'll be, parent anxiety is a big issue.
No, and I know that, even as a parent.
Right.
No, I guess.
You better take the microphone again.
It wasn't really social media as much as is the actual separation the same that it was before kids could text their parents from college
No.
12 times a day and tell them what grades they got.
No, but it becomes that. It becomes that. My head of school, his wonderful daughter, went down 3 miles away and went to Harvard college. And he said 6 weeks in, he said, she's writing us every day. I don't think that's right. Is that good, Michael? She's writing every day. She's at college, that shouldn't. And then I said, just wait a while. Just wait a while. And then at 7 weeks, he says, we're not hearing from her at all. We're not hearing from her at all. It's kind of breaking our hearts, right? And this is a man I care about and consider a friend. And there's that journey. But once the kid gets into college, the communication does diminish. But certainly at the beginning of college, it's very different. And a mother told me that she was getting a call in the first 2 weeks her son was in college. She was getting these contentless calls from her son that he really had nothing to talk about. And she couldn't figure it out. And after a while, she figured out. She realized he was walking from class to class and wanted to be talking to somebody, so he looked like he was talking to somebody. But he didn't know, so I called his mom. And he realized she was a prop in his little drama. And as soon as he got a friend, she stopped making those calls, right? So I don't, do I think that kids are delaying their independence with this constant contact with parents? Yes. Do I think a kid should go to the registrar's office and make a decision rather than getting the registrar's office, talking to somebody and calling a parent to get the decision made? Yeah, I do. And I think parents said, you're there, why don't you make the decision? Or I can't talk to you now, sweetie, right? I think because of the instantaneous connection that we're capable of, I mean, it's just bewildering. I did a clinical conference on FaceTime in the car driving here. I wasn't driving. I had a young driver I hired to drive. And I did a clinical case conference with some parents I'd met at an international school. They were not at that school. They were now in Stockholm. I was being driven to New Paltz, New York, and we were discussing a boy at a school in Texas. And I just think, really? We did that for half an hour. I mean, it's amazing. Does it change the nature of the parent's concern or the son? Not really. They are all struggling with things that boys and their parents have always struggled with, that at least in my career as a psychologist. Other questions? Please. Your name?
Hi, Erin Downs from Millbrook
Hi,
School.
Erin.
Hi.
From what school?
Millbrook School.
How about that?
How are you?
How about that? My old school.
Yes, yes. The activity that you did with the parent voices and the student voices that you would read back and forth,
Yes.
you mentioned that it was in the senior year.
Right.
Would there be value or would it have the same impact if it was something that we did with juniors at our sort of initial junior parent?
I wouldn't do that one.
Okay.
I think that you have to be pretty close, Aaron, to the departure. I think people their chests have to be a little full. It's hugely sentimental. I mean, it is profoundly corny, right? I mean, it's deeply corny. I don't apologize for that. It just is. But I think November, December, January, February, March, April of senior year, as I go off to college, before kids have chosen a college or before kids are getting into college, it's a little hypothetical. I would do something I might do something at Junior Parents Weekend that would do, as my daughter applies to college, my biggest worry is ... As I apply to college, what I want my parents to know is ... I would get at their worries about the process. But I think that might, now that I've thought of it, you made me think of that right now. I want to do that with a junior class. I think that'd be really interesting to get everybody's collective fears out in the open. Your name?
I'm Will Cardamone from Independent School up in Syracuse. Hi. So I think many of us are experiencing students with a lot more mental health issues.
Yep.
I wonder, you have a long view. Percentage-wise, are there more teens that we work with that have mental health problems, particularly anxiety and depression?
Yes.
And I have my theories, having been in this profession a long, long time, not quite as long as you,
Okay.
about why this generation of teens has more pronounced mental health issues. But I'd be interested in hearing what you think.
All right, you want to keep your theory a secret and hear my
okay,
theory,
I'll tell you-
so you
I'll tell
can
you-
test your theory. No, Will, I'm good for this. I heard that. All right. So you got a secret theory, and you want to see whether I have. We have. Well, I was at a conference in
What's your
Vancouver.
hourly rate?
I was at a conference in Vancouver last spring, and a young psychiatrist, well known in Canada, got up and said, the biggest mental health epidemic in North America, rising rates of anxiety in teenagers and college students. The president of Tufts University said 8 months ago in a speech that a quarter of the kids at Tufts were being seen at the counseling center for anxiety. You know what it takes to get into Tufts. These are hardworking, focused kids, and a quarter of them are anxious. But the president said that was an increase of 25% over the previous 2 years. American Academy of Pediatrics, maybe 10 or 12 years ago, had a white paper on they were seeing more anxious kids in wellness visits at pediatricians' office across the country. They said they attributed it to college expectations of parents, overscheduling, and the loss of free play. I put all the weight on the loss of free play. The greatest change in American childhood in my lifetime has been the loss of free outdoor play, mixed age, undirected free play. And I think kids who've never been out of their parents' sight, never been out of the house with a group of other kids, playing around in the woods as I did in the summers, sometimes 6, 7, 8 hours, no damn phone. Our parents just had to imagine we were okay, right? And we had to imagine we were okay.
I was one of 10 children. My parents never knew where I was.
Yes, exactly. Well, but that was practice competence and practice independence and practice social skills. And I think where the anxiety comes from is kids not knowing if I can really do it if I don't have a coach, white lines, and a phone in my pocket. All right? I'm tethered, so how will I be when I'm untethered? I'm not sure I'm going to be all right. And when I've been ramped up to these expectations, can I see this through? You know.
So take their phones away from them and tell them to go outside.
Yeah, but nobody feels safe. Cable, you know, I grew up in Manhattan, went to collegiate school for boys, up from nursery school to 8th grade, and then to Millbrook. And both experiences were really helpful to my independence. The experience in Manhattan was important because I, like all children in New York, was given a bus and subway pass at the age of 10. And I got myself to school on 2 public buses, from 94th Street down to 79th Street, and then change buses, go over to the west side and walk to collegiate. And then return, do the next day, right? Return and repeat. And I did that, and I felt independent and competent getting around New York. But then we went through such an upsurge in urban violence, an epidemic of violence really between 75 and 95, and parents became frightened, and it's all on cable TV. Now what I know is, because I follow some of these things, the crime rate in New York at this moment is the same as it was in 1957 when I was 10 years old. But nobody feels that New York is as safe as it once was. It actually is as safe as it once was, but because it was so unsafe for a period of time in the middle, we all feel unsafe. And we all know every child who's snatched somewhere in the country, and it makes us anxious. And there's research to show that the more cable TV you watch, the more anxious and paranoid you become. That's well documented. If you don't want to get anxious and paranoid, avoid cable TV. What was your theory?
I'm pretty aligned. I think social media is a big player in it. The compare and despair, the constant, how do I rank compared to my peer group,
Right.
which was something we were unaware of as teens, really, I suppose,
Right.
other than who made the varsity basketball team. But
Right.
so I think social media has a very pernicious
Okay.
involvement. I think our unstable country and world, which is tied into the cable news, but
Yep.
and big issues like global warming that make them feel like, what's the
Okay.
future going to be for me? And is our country going to be able to survive the disunion we have? And so,
Yeah, you're giving a bigger, more global and political context. For me, the experience near thing that has been lost is free play. Free play out of your parents' sight. And when I think of the hours of free play I had out of my parents' sight and how important that is to who I became. It's not that I was detached from my parents. It's not that their words didn't mean a lot to me. It's not that I didn't love them. But to feel competent away from your parents is something I don't see enough of today. And one of the things I like about my boys' school is that there's a boy ethos of back off, parents. Back off. We're not going to tell you that much. And moms are always sobbing to me. My Belmont Hill boy won't talk to me. I said, yep, that's part of the drill. Sorry about that. Part of the drill. But there's a kind of pride, or group pride in it, right? It's our place. And I think that's normal and healthy. A couple more, please. You know you can't talk till you have a microphone. Heejin, I can see you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Hi. Thank you so much for just enlightening us. One thing that struck me while you were speaking was our most difficult parents
Yes.
are the ones who are struggling the most to letting go. And I think as college counselors, we think that we're working with a student, but we are really working with the family.
I know.
And I think the overbearing mother or the father or the divorced parents who are arguing. And now I understand why we're in this crazy conversation in the midst of a meeting where the mother is trying to say, I know best, and then the father is saying, I know best.
Okay.
And
Stop.
yes.
When that happens 2 or 3 times and that there's tension in the room, I want you to say, I'm feeling quite uncomfortable. Can you say that?
Yes.
I'm feeling quite uncomfortable. Would it be better if I met with the two of you separately? When people are doing their marital hatred in front of you, you do not have to sit in a meeting for that. And you should not. You end it. Say, this makes me very uncomfortable. Now, some people will collect themselves and do better. And other people would just go on fighting, and you say, I just don't think this meeting is productive, and you end it. I do not think, do you know what therapists get paid? Do you know what family therapists get paid?
No.
Yeah, well, they get $250 an hour to sit and listen to that. And it's painful, and it's often ugly, and it's, and it is even if you're trained for it. But when somebody's doing it to you essentially for free, you don't have to sit there for that. And what I want you to say to parents, all parents, at the beginning of the process, is what are you hoping for and what are you most afraid of? And then listen and write it down. What are you hoping for the college process? What are you most afraid of? I want the parents to confess their fears early on. And then I can say, oh, now I see your fears are in play here, right?
Yes.
Because you told me. So what are you most afraid of about the college process? His life will be over.
No, is this helpful to ask that in front of a child or when the child is not in the room?
Any old time.
Okay.
In fact, I would ask it in some form or another every time I meet with the parents. So we're part of the way down this road. What are you worrying about now? Any concerns you have? Any worries you have, big worries? Are your worries lessened, or they've increased? Since you're going to be asked, since everybody in here knows there's a kind of, you just said it,
Yeah.
There's a psychotherapeutic aspect to it. Since there is, you might as well go for it.
Yeah.
I'm dealing with not just your child, but with your fears. So tell me what they are.
Thank you.
Other questions, they all came from one side. All right, this is the good side, and this is the, were you paying attention? Were you, all right, I'm just teasing you.
I'm going one more from this side.
Oh, please, you're right in front of me. I'm Joshua, hi.
Hi. So you referenced a number of different talks that you gave to parents, to students of all
Right.
different ages, together, separate. Do you feel that for a conversation about the anxiety about this process, or what it may also mean disguising as college anxiety, is there a best group to speak to? Is it better to speak to the parents? Is it better, like as a assembly, is it better to talk to students, them together, both but separately? What are your thoughts?
I don't know what's best. I think the most, the ripest moment is November of senior year. Everybody's nuts. Okay? So you've got the ED application and right, and it's done, and the word hasn't come back, and that's the rawest moment. And I think that'd be a very good time to talk to kids and a very good time to talk to parents. I'd like to get parents together and say, what's your biggest fear? Well, my child gets turned down, right? Early decision, their heart's set on it, they get turned down. And then you can say, you're all right, you can say, yes, it happens every year. We see it every year. Would you like to know how it goes for the vast majority of kids? Would you like to know how they handle it? Would you like to know how they comfort each other? If you ask the kids, then you're essentially, if you ask a group of kids that, you're asking the question I do, which is, if you don't get into your first choice college, what's the long-term impact on your life? You're welcome to that question. I don't think I've got a patent on it or a copyright. I think it's a great question to ask of seniors who are all tensed up. And I think it's great to stick with it and get a variety of answers. You're going to get a range of answers, but stick with it until you get kids who are giving you different voices. And you would know the kids, so you could say, you could call them. I'm bumbling about. But sometimes when I ask my question about what's the long-term impact on your life, and I get 4 kids who say, nothing at all, nothing at all, nothing at all, I say, thank you very much. Now, did anybody feel your heart drop, but the battery went? What do you think, Andrew? Just stopped. Yeah. Thank you. When I have heard from 4 kids who seem completely chill, I say, is there anybody in here who, when I ask the question, if you rejected your first choice college, did somebody's heart drop? And then all of a sudden I've got 3 kids. If it doesn't balance out naturally, I then ask for it, and I get what I'm after, because I know they're there. It's just kind of the way it played out a little unexpectedly, but I can ask for what I want. Do you feel like you could do that with seniors? Yeah. And then I would ask juniors their biggest fears about the process. And I would ask 9th graders, you going to keep this up for 4 years? Right? The really wound up ones. And I would talk to I always talk to 9th and 10th graders about sleep. And because in independent schools, when I do assemblies, I get somebody to write down the numbers, and the middle schoolers are sleeping on average. If I get 12 kids, it's not great science, but it's something. Average of 7 hours and 15 minutes. I ask middle schoolers, what does your pediatrician recommend? And they say 8 to 10. 8 to 9. I say you're all getting 7 hours and 15 minutes on average. By 11th and 12th grade, it's 6 hours and 15 minutes, or 6 hours. And I say, is that healthy? Is that normal? And I tell them about a woman at the Bryn Mawr School in Baltimore who told me it wasn't until she got to college, she was a graduate, an alumna of Bryn Mawr. She said it wasn't until she got to college she realized that she had been exhausted for 4 years. She's been exhausted through high school. And I present that to parents, and I ask them, is that what you want, actually, for your child? Is that what you want them to remember about their high school experience? You can tell what I think of that trade, right? Come on, please. And then you have to give me the mic back.
Of course, of course.
Yes, tell me your...
My name is Jared, yeah.
Jared.
So I mean, I think we all work really hard to create environments where we're taking the temperature down.
Yes.
But I also think there's like a huge diversity to the families we work with. And I know that every year there's a handful of families whose paralysis about this like turning point is so great that they actually, I think, undermine the potential of their kids. Yeah. So how do you talk to those families about sort of letting their kids soar in college while not looking like a hypocrite while you're sending messages to the families who sort of are in the majority, who are putting too much pressure on this?
And these families, the family you're talking about is the family that can't let go, doesn't want their child to look at all the possibilities because they need them to, or there are two ways I'd go about it. There's a tougher way and a gentler way. The gentler way is more frankly therapeutic. Tell me what it's going to mean to you to lose this child from your family. This oldest child who looks after her younger siblings, whom you clearly adore. How's it going to be to have her go away? Now that's a psychologist question, not a college counselor's question, but it is a human question, and I don't think it's necessarily off limits or so intrusive. Do you find it? No. Yeah. Tell me about your wonderful daughter. Tell me what she's meant to you. Tell me what it's going to be for you when she goes away.
And then get the Kleenex out.
And then get the Kleenex out. That's right, but that's okay. That's fair. That's human. The tougher thing is to say to a parent, what do you make of the fact that classmates with your daughter's record are applying to different places than your daughter? Period. Or question mark, long silence. And that is, now you've created some discomfort. You've created some tension. That you're doing this differently than other families. How do you understand that? And that's challenging, and the discomfort would be real. But it might be productive. And they might say, we are doing this differently? And you say, yes. And they say, well, how? And then you say, well, I think your daughter's not applying to places she's capable of going. And I don't know what's holding her back. Uncomfortable silence, right? One of the things, Jared, that I've learned about the difference between psychologists and educators don't actually let people sit in uncomfortable silences. They'll do it to children, but they won't do it to adults. And as somebody who had a private practice for 25 years, I was empathic with my patients, but I felt that part of my job was asking tough questions about how they were doing their lives and why the decisions they were making. But the most important thing is not the question, it's the question followed by silence. And I find most educators won't let somebody sit with a difficult question. Okay?
I think that's what we have time for. Thank you very much.
Oh, you're very welcome.